of $400 to guarantee the purchase of 20 square feet of tidal wetland credits from an approved tidal wetland mitigation bank. The wetlands permit for this project shall expire on September 9th, 2023 if construction has not begun, and if an extension to the permit is needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 29th, 2023, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. I'll now present a brief presentation. Next slide. Again, the applicant requests is to construct a riprap revetment, a bulkhead, retaining wall, wharf, and floating pier with an open-sided boathouse. Next slide is a vicinity map indicating the 20 Markley Road property and the College Creek watershed. Next slide shows the aerial photograph of the portion of the property that the proposed project will occur in. Next slide shows the topography of the property, steep slopes coming down to the edge of the water in this portion of the property, and fairly flat open parking lot in the northern side. Next slide shows the site plan. We have demarcated and distinguished the different parts of this project in two separate colors, green being the portions of the projects which fall outside of the Wetlands Board's jurisdiction. The portions highlighted in yellow are those portions that fall within the project's jurisdiction. So outside the board's jurisdiction, we have the proposed boathouse, proposed floating pier, the northern revetment, southern revetment, one of the proposed retaining walls. Within the board's jurisdiction, there's the other retaining wall and open piled wharf. In between the two retaining walls is a boat ramp, and it's for that reason which we have the retaining walls to create stability for this proposed boat ramp. The next slide is shows the northern revetment, again highlighted in green, and outside of this board's jurisdiction as it's above mean high water, and a proposed floating pier. Scattered throughout the project is existing concrete, which is proposed to stay. The next slide shows the southern revetment. And the next slide shows the boat ramp, again, the portion that is in this board's jurisdiction. This cross section is depicted at an angle coming into the boat ramp from the water. So as you enter into the boat ramp, the retaining wall that falls within the board's jurisdiction on the right-hand side, the retaining wall outside the board will be on the left-hand side, and the proposed wharf on the other side of the board's jurisdictional retaining wall. In between, there is some existing concrete that it would cause more harm than benefit to take out. Associated with these are the 20 square feet of wetland vegetation loss associated with this project. Next slide gets into the pictures of the area in question. As you can see, the existing concrete rubble and vegetation that is in the area, and the location of the proposed retaining walls and the wharf. Site photo number 2 highlights more of the same area. Site photo number 3 shows the area of the finger piers and the northern revetment. Site photo number 4 shows the location of the retaining wall landward of vegetation. Again, and the next slide shows permit conditions. Again, should the board choose to approve this permit proposal, the applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and or federal permits as required for this project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations. That the existing pier and piles to be removed shall be disposed of in approved landfill. that a surety of $400 to guarantee the purchase of the 20 square feet of tidal wetland credits is obtained, and that this wetlands permit for this project shall expire on September 9th, 2023, if written request for an extension is not submitted to the Stormwater Resource Protection Division no later than July 29th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you very much for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have. Yes, sir.
What's going to happen with all the pilings?
Those are slated to be removed and disposed of. How
do they remove the pilings?
That I will defer to the contractor on. You can answer that.
So, this is framed as a very extensive project, but the only thing that we've got jurisdiction on is the 20 square foot retaining wall.
Yes, sir.
Trevor, could you go back to the slide that depicts that, maybe a photograph, so we can understand a little bit better about where those wetlands are? And
absolutely. So from the aerial site plan, this area in question, highlighted in yellow, is where the 20 square feet of vegetation is impacted.
Between them?
Actually, yes, scattered throughout, which is also where the concrete rubble will be. Or
is it in the footprint of the retaining walls that's where the impact of the 20 square feet is occurring?
Yes.
So they're acting somewhat like a groin to keep the boat ramp protected.
That is correct.
And is the wharf a tending pier essentially when you're launching a boat?
The retaining wall will more than likely be the tending pier for launching the boat. It has this cross section shows it fairly well. It has a walkway on top of it. So 4 foot by 20 walkway for people to walk along and control the boat. Currently, there's really nothing there, so it's a little bit of a safety hazard.
It's currently used as a ramp, but the broken gravel is kind of the pseudo wall right now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the intent here is to get this thing structured up to be more solid.
On that diagram, wait, when it says broken concrete to remain, area not backfilled, wait, what's that pointing to? What area are we talking about?
This area is pointing to, this area is really a peninsula that has scattered within wetland vegetation and concrete rubble. So that denotes that none of that concrete is going to be removed in order to decrease wetland loss or impacts there, and that no backfill is going to be occurring in the vegetated area.
So all those chunks of concrete in the photograph, can you go back to the photograph?
Absolutely.
Okay, so all these chunks of concrete, they just stay there? And what about the photograph that shows where the other retaining wall is going to be? Or, yeah. What happens along there?
This concrete also stays, and the revetment will actually occur above the existing concrete.
So the revetment is above there, and then that concrete just stays the way it is, and the pilings are pulled out, but and then that's where the floating pier is going to be, in front of this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. To the right is upstream, right, in this photo?
Yes.
Well, that's roughly mean water right now in this picture? Or
Yeah, that's fairly mean water. It's could be a little bit low, but it's not fully low water.
high water will get up above that concrete.
Yes, sir.
Just along the wharf, or the main pier complex, which you summarized, is not within our jurisdiction as a private pier.
is there a reason why the wharf wasn't included in that since that is a docking structure, a mooring structure?
I believe because its proximity to the wetlands and its potential.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Is the applicant or his representative present? Please go ahead and state your name and your relationship to the project, please, sir.
Yeah, I'm Danny Winall with Waters Edge Construction. I'm helping Larry out on this project as a consultant. Larry's actually acting as his own agent, but since he's a member of the board, I'm representing him here tonight. So I'll answer any questions y'all got about the wetlands portion of the project. And your question about the wharf, Larry wanted to put the wharf. He really wanted to incorporate this thing the way it used to be, is what he wanted to do. And it was a peninsula out there with the retaining wall on both sides, and he wanted to encapsulate the area in the middle of it. But after our meeting with the staff and with VMRC, we decided that was not the best way to proceed. So we compromised and we put an open pile wharf on the offshore side, parallel to the groin, as you stated. It's basically a groin. There's groins on each side to protect the existing boat ramp. Is what the intent is. The retaining wall that's out of the board's jurisdiction on the right-hand side, usually we would use riprap there, but there is some existing wetlands, so we would put the retaining wall upland of the existing wetlands, and that's a low impact area, so we feel like the wetlands will survive if we do that. And we had to make a lot of modifications to this project with the new living shoreline legislation that was passed in July. And that's why it's a little different than what we would normally submit. I will say on the northern revetment area, with the living shoreline legislation, you could put a sill out there, but if we put a sill out there, it would bump the proposed floating pier even further out into the channel. So we went with the best compromise, which was just a very small revetment above the existing broken concrete. And like I say, the new legislation really ties our hands on a lot of things we can do. So that's what we came up with.
So beyond Mr. Waltrip's desire to regain previous functionality of the area, is just from a purpose and need standpoint, is that wharf there to stage boats for?
Yes, that's exactly what it said. That was his intent. He wanted to be able to launch the boat and then take the boat off the trailer, go around and tie up to that wharf while, tie the boat up to the wharf, then go get in the truck and move the truck back up top of the hill. They've been using this thing. Him and his brother have been using it since the 40s, maybe. It's been there a long time.
Do you have to have those retaining walls on either side of the launch area?
They're there to protect the ramp. The one that's in your jurisdiction, there was a wall there. It's still partially there. So this is just, it's basically replacement of the existing wall that was there in place beside the gravel areas. We feel we do need those walls. Basically replacing what was there originally.
This is Bob Lucan's remote. If I'm too loud, let me know. Can you characterize the current use of the boat ramp in terms of, is it used by local fishermen or other people in the area, or strictly by Mr. Waltrip's family, friends, etc.?
It's mainly used by Mr. Waltrip's family and friends, but he does let people go down there and use it. He's been real gracious with that ramp, but it's mainly used by family as a private ramp.
So the access to that is a gravel drive down to the ramp?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, sir. Now open the public hearing up for any other public comments.
Mr. Chair, before any members of the public speak here tonight, there are two voice messages I'd like to play for the board.
Please.
This is Mary and William King living at 119 Crown Point Road in the Kings Point housing area. I'm calling concerning VMRC 201053. The two of us endorse the remarks of Mr. Bill Schneider. His assessment is on point. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Dr. Carl Kronlein, K-A-R-L-K-R-O-E-N-L-E-I-N. I live at 109 Wake Robin Road, Williamsburg, Virginia, 23185 in the Kings Point neighborhood. I'm calling in reference to case VMRC 20-1053, 20-1053 in regards to some construction along College Creek. I would like to formally express my concern of this construction. One of the majors is the impact of the creek, wildlife, and traffic, and the nature of the creek itself. It's been part of Williamsburg area since the mid-70s, and one of the amazing things is the amount of nature that has been maintained through, whether or not you're talking Halfway Creek, College Creek, or even the residences along the larger areas of the James River. On a personal note or a practical note, the size and scope of this construction seems to be a concern for boat access to other neighborhoods. Obviously, the Kings Point neighborhood being one as far as the boat ramp we have there. Thank you for your time. And again, I do not support a construction of this size along the creek there by any means. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Okay, thank you. Open for any public comments. Please, sir. Please state your name.
Thank you. Mr. Chairperson, members of the JCC Wetlands Boards, thank you for the opportunity to speak and share a few of the concerns I have with Mr. Waltrip's proposal. Case number.
Excuse me, Mr. Miller. Could you state your name and?
Oh, yes, sir. It's right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I apologize. It's right next. I'm sorry. With case number 20-1053. My name is David Miller. I reside at 126 North Point Drive, Williamsburg, with my lovely wife, Wendy. Our home property is located directly across the College Creek from Mr. Waltrip's property and is the closest property in Kings Point to the proposed marina. I've been a resident of James City County for 31 years. I am a retired nuclear engineer from Dominion Energy and spent the bulk of my 38-year career in regulatory compliance and in protecting workers, the public, and the environment from the hazards of radiation exposure. I also have some limited experience in marine construction at our residence and as a contractor at the Governor's Land Marina seawall dock replacement project this past winter. After closely reviewing the joint permit application, I submitted my protest to you last Wednesday via email. My letter included 3 major concerns about the truthfulness or transparency of the JPA, as well as 25 questions related to size, scope, number of vessels, unsupervised activities, no residents on the property, pollution, noise, property values, historical impact, hardened shoreline, RPA, vegetated wetlands, silting erosion, impedance on navigable channels, and access for future repairs, etc. I understand fully that many of these questions fall outside of your charter or jurisdiction for a single residential user application. However, I'm asking you to reject this proposal as currently written and have Mr. Waltrip resubmit it as a commercial use for the following reasons. The sheer size and scope of this project would not meet any reasonable person's definition of residential use. At 8,500 square feet, this project consumes approximately 15 times the amount of shoreline and waterways as compared to the average docks on our creek. At 1,320 square feet, the boathouse footprint is larger than many of our homes. How ironic that the 136-foot by 8-foot floating dock with 8 slips was an integral part of Governor's Land Marina, a large-scale commercial operation. I was there working when they came to get that dock, floated it down a river and into College Creek. So one day it is commercial and the next it is residential. By the way, this dock has been situated in the creek unpermitted since March 26th of this year. How many private residential boating users in our county own, operate, and moor 9 personal powered vessels at their residence? It is somewhat insulting to me, and maybe should be to you as well, to believe one property owner would claim that many boats for singular recreational use, especially on the limited size of College Creek, where there are now only 12 total power boats moored on the entire creek. How is this JPA classified as residential use when there is no residence on the property? No one there to monitor or supervise boating activity or potential negative impact to the environment. Maybe a better solution would be to have Mr. Waltrip build this marina at his primary waterfront residence on Powhatan Creek, where he would have full access and supervision of the 9 motorboats. I called Mr. Waltrip's agent/contractor, Mr. Danny Winnell, about installing a boat lift at our residence earlier this year. He was very kind, spent 45 minutes sharing his experiences and providing helpful insights and recommendations. However, he told me our residential project was not large enough to fit into his current business model that focused on larger commercial grade projects. In closing, I fully believe in all property owners' rights to implement additions or improvements, including reasonable access to adjacent waterways. However, when these additions negatively affect so many others, we rely on government agencies such as this one to step in and do the right thing for the betterment of all. There is no doubt that this marina proposal looks and smells every bit of a commercial grade and not a single-use residential. Thank you for your time and consideration, respectfully.
Mr. Chairman, the speaker raised a very valid point about how do we judge this? Is it single residential or is it commercial? And we treat those 2 types of projects very differently. And I went back, I read through the code, and I was sort of confused. I didn't see any, detailed explanations of what is considered a residential project and what's a commercial project. It's, at least those terms aren't defined in the wetlands ordinance. And I was wondering if this time, if I could ask our our county attorney who represents our board to come forward, and if she could enlighten the board about how we are to judge this. Where are the definitions of what's commercial and what's residential?
Mr. Gussman, you're correct. I'm Liz Parman, Assistant County Attorney. There is no definition of commercial in the wetlands ordinance, and the applicant has indicated that this is for private use now. 9 slips might seem like a lot, but that doesn't indicate that it's a commercial property. The size of the pier does not indicate that it's commercial. You'd have to take the word of the applicant. Of course, if it was to be commercial, then other sections of the county code would apply, such as the zoning ordinance. He'd be required to get an SUP from the Board of Supervisors, and certainly VMRC has jurisdiction over the pier. But applicant has indicated that it's for private use, and I think that I'd recommend that you take the applicant's word on that, and that your jurisdiction is only in the 20 square feet of wetlands impacts.
Thank you.
If I can impose on the VMRC rep, Mr. Madden. Just curious, is VMRC taking jurisdiction on the pier as anything other than a private pier?
Thank you, Mr. Rodley, for giving me an opportunity to speak. The Marine Resources Commission will take and assert jurisdiction over all portions of the project that extend channelward of mean low water. That includes the dual slip boathouse, the proposed floating pier with gangway, and any portion of the woodpile wharf and or jetties that extend channelward of mean low water. And one of the things I might take a moment to expand on that. It was at my urging that we left the stone. I know that it seems a bit counterintuitive for all that stone to be left down on that beach, but because so much vegetation has grown up through it and it is naturalized, we felt that and I encourage staff to consider leaving the stone there because of the fact that there was so much vegetation growing up in amongst the stones. So I know you had some curious about that, so I thought I would elaborate that while I was up here at the podium. Do you have any further? Have I answered your question, Mr. Rowley, to your satisfaction?
You did, thank you.
I'm a little bit, I don't quite understand, how we interact with the VMRC. So have you is there a VMRC hearing now scheduled to consider the aspects that are their jurisdiction and not ours?
Certainly, yes. We would, typically what happens when there's a project that's a combination of needing a wetland board permit and needing a VMRC permit, we don't take any action whatsoever on the project except for conducting a public interest review of the project until this board has taken action. Because in some cases, in other counties, the board asserts jurisdiction over certain structures that would be taken off the board.
Well, how do we know the VMRC will have a hearing on this then?
I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat that.
How do we know that the VMRC will schedule a hearing on this?
Let me be clear on that. If this project survives this board hearing and it continues to be protested, there will be a hearing. The law requires that the wetland board, VMRC staff not administratively approve a protested project. That is specifically outlined in the Code of Virginia. So to the satisfaction of everyone that's behind me, there will be a hearing on what's beyond mean low water when it finally comes, when it's finally matured.
So we now have a rocky shoreline in James City County.
Well, yeah. See, when we talked about that, we felt that if we went in there and started putting equipment down in there to pull the rocks out, that all the rest of the vegetation would just be destroyed. So we said, well, leave it be, and then hopefully it will naturalize, or it'll slide into the creek. It may slide into the creek. That's just conjecture, but we thought it would create more damage to the wetland in attempting to pluck it out. Now, if the board feels that I have overstepped my authority in making a recommendation to the board, to the staff, you can certainly take whatever action necessary to do that. But I think you'll see my point.
I think there's a lot of, I mean, when we looked at that shore, there are a lot of concrete chunks, you know, along the shoreline. I guess there's also a lot of buried concrete too, under, you know, that we're not seeing that's under the mud as well.
There might be, yeah, there might be a fair amount there. That there might be a fair amount of material dumped over that, because you know, I see that a lot on the northern neck. I see a lot on the northern neck. That's a common occurrence.
Thank you.
Mr. Madden, do you see other structures? I know you cover more than just James City County, and you've been doing this for quite some time. Have you seen other private mooring facilities configured in such a manner across the state?
To be frank, it's rare that we have a family mooring facility of this size expected to have this many boats. Yeah, I usually don't, but this is only my opinion based on my experience with residential properties up on the northern neck. Have I gone up to on piers where they have half a dozen boats moored up? Sure. Yeah. 4th of July, Memorial Day. Everybody comes down to see Grandpa and Grandma down at the beach, at their place on the river. Yes, I've seen that.
Thank you.
Yes, so the issue of private versus commercial was raised.
This is Bob Dukins again, remotely. I'm wondering if Mr. Madden or perhaps our folks on the legal staff could clarify whether during the permitting process, in which we're granting basically the right to a private individual to construct the revetment and the retaining walls and so forth, whether there's some way to establish I guess a covenant, if you will, against future use of these facilities in a commercial manner, or given no basic way to do that in the permitting process, whether someone might explain the mechanism for citizens to object to the change of this from a private operation to a commercial operation.
Mr. Lukens, this is Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner for the Stormwater Resource Protection Division. I can answer that question for you. Staff had concerns, and we asked the zoning administrator to weigh in on this, and she contacted Mr. Waltrip and asked him to provide a written statement to that effect, that this will be a private enterprise used by his family. And should the property sell and should the use change, as Ms. Parman said, then there's other actions that would take place from the zoning enforcement and board of supervisors, special use permit and things of that nature. But Mr. Waltrip has assured us in writing that it will be retained as a private facility.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson.
You're welcome.
Mr. Wilson, I didn't see that statement in the packet. I mean, there's a lot of material, and I might have missed it. But is that that is in the official record?
It is an official record. It did not make it there until about 2:30 this afternoon.
Oh, so that's why the board members.
So you may not have seen it if you haven't looked recently, and I apologize for that.
No, I did not check after 2:30 this
so
afternoon.
It is in the official record. It's online, and it will remain there.
Is there any way to present that tonight so we can see what it says?
Certainly, I'll work on that.
In Novus, isn't it? Is it in Novus?
Yes, sir. It is.
Ma'am, please.
My name is Chapman, Mary Lewis Chapman. My husband and I moved to Kings Point in 1974. And just about every clear day since then, we have made the walk down to the creek. If you look across the creek, you cannot believe that anyone would want to put the structures that they are talking about putting. They would be right into the channel. They would interfere with every little boat that goes by, and most of these, of course, are not rowboats nowadays, but they're pretty small. They don't even have motors. When we walk every day, we stop almost at the creek, and we look off to the right, up into the trees, and we see something that looks like your discarded dining room table, big one. Well, of course, it's an eagle's nest. And it probably has, if we're out there on a spring day, it has a couple of eaglets sitting on the branch. You go down to the creek, and there's another eagle's nest. And that eagle is a little bit aggressive and gets into trouble with the osprey. The osprey comes every year, sits on a piling out in the water, almost where this boathouse will be, and raises her young. Daddy goes and gets the fish from the fish market and takes care of her, and she sits there for 2 or 3 months. Now, this is something that we should enjoy today, because if a marina is built in that small waterway, this will be the last time we will ever see these things. When our Kings Point clubhouse was built half a dozen years ago, we had a lot of regulations. Everybody threw at us. The Chesapeake Bay Act, the environmental regulations, we were very glad to go by every one of those so that we could enjoy the creek and not hurt it. We are on a hill. We are quite some distance from the creek, but we had plenty of regulations to go through. It seems to me that a boathouse in the creek, this is something to think about. Thank you.
Do you have just comments? Please.
Germain, I believe, discussion on residential versus commercial, and to Mr. Wilson's clarification on some of that. And they're not here to speak for themselves, but I can tell you at this moment right now that I have friends that use that boat ramp and they pay for it. So if you want to talk about what's commercial and what's residential, there's no residents on the property. They use the boat ramp now and pay to use it. And that's just in its current configuration. You can only imagine what it's going to be like when there are places for 8 to 10 motorboats with docks, and boathouses, and all the other accessories that go along with that. So I wanted to just add that to the record. Don't believe there's anybody in this county that could dispute that. You pay to use the ramp now. Thank you very much.
Michael, you put up, this is the signed letter from Waltrip.
Yeah, Mr. Gussman, this is the letter I was referring to from Mr. Waltrip.
Thank you for from the screen. Okay. That's a part of the official record, right?
It is.
Thank you.
Please, sir.
Gentlemen, my name is Don. Excuse me. My name is Don Pratt. I have lived for the past 25 years at 110 Archers Hope Drive in Kings Point. And I live on the water, the main thoroughfare for the creek, I guess you could say. I would like to first second the comments made by Mr. Miller. I think David's put a great deal of effort into researching things relative to the proposal, and I've found nothing that is wrong with what he has come up with. I would like to ask if any of you have been to and on the creek, on College Creek. Have you ever been there? Any of you? 1, 2, 50%? I would encourage you to experience what Ms. Chapman experienced. I take my pontoon, tritoon out on the creek frequently and experience the eagles and the ospreys and so forth that are there. And I'm amazed at the nature that we have on the creek. And I would hate to see that go away or in any way be altered. Not necessarily that this project would do that, but every small change we make is going to impact something in some way. And I think this is a little bit beyond a small impact. I question the distance from the end of the boathouse to the opposite side of the channel. I don't know if we have information on that or not. From the end or the entrance to the boathouse to the far side.
Please, sir, just come forward and state your name for the record.
My name is David Stanhope. I live at 111 Archers Hope in Kings Point neighborhood. I also sit on the board of the Kings Point Club. And I believe in some of the records that you have of bathymetries that were taken. I'm not sure who did them. I think it was. Okay, try
in the package.
And I believe it was about 120 feet from the marsh, which the Kings Point Club actually owns that marsh straight across over to Waltrip's.
Chairman, it would be really helpful if the staff could put up either the aerial photograph and use a pointer to show what exactly where we're talking about. What's 120 feet from where to where?
Where the current floating pier sits across to the red line, which is more or less the boundary of the wetland, about 0 feet there of water. That's about 120 feet from the land across. That dock currently sits, I believe, about 35 to 40 feet off of the land.
So this is with the channel where the boats go through.
And the channel, when you look at the bathymetry, runs along Waltrip's property line. It's very shallow and soft mud on the other side where the marsh is. Mm-hmm. So by building further out the floating pier in the boathouse, you would.
I didn't get the impression it was being built further out than what we see here. If you were to overlay the new construction on this, what would it look like? Would it further squeeze?
Excuse me, Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah.
Staff did not look at that portion of this project because it was outside of the board's jurisdiction.
Right.
I apologize.
Okay. I mean, a lot of the concerns that are being raised, which are valid ones, have to do with things that are outside of our scope. I mean, we're here to review the retaining wall, which appears to be a pretty good engineered solution to maintain that boat ramp. All the other aspects of the project are interesting, but not within our scope.
Well, I apologize for my lack of understanding in terms of what your scope is, and I appreciate your thought there. But I would encourage you all to go and visit the site. If you haven't been out there for years, then please go back and do that. I have traveled that area frequently, and it's not real deep, I can tell you. There's a concern I have for the historic preservation of the area. I've often said that I would love to see Colonial Williamsburg maybe even turn something into a commercial experience that visitors to Colonial Williamsburg could have, experiencing the route that our colonists took up College Creek, or whatever it was called at that time, to Williamsburg, to see what the colonists saw when they first came here. And that's certainly contrary to keeping it residential. I have personally paid a $5 fee to access the water. It was a fee that was voluntary, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if it's still charged or not. Danny, do you know?
I'm sorry. If you're going to make comments, you got to, please come up to the microphone and speak in the microphone so that it can be part of the
I'm Danny
record.
Winall, representing Mr. Waltrip, and yeah, Mrs. Waltrip, when she was still alive, had a little box out beside her house, and people could pay a $5 fee to use the ramp. She gathered it up and she gave it to the church at the end of the month. So it was more
But it was strictly voluntary?
It was strictly voluntary, as far as I know. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. As I said, for me, it was voluntary. I don't know that there was a commercial aspect to it. Today, I'm not sure. I don't know. If there are 9 slips permitted as residential, would twice that be okay? Is there a limit to the number of slips that could be put in there? And so I ask you to think of a conclusion, a logical conclusion to where that might go. And I also question whether or not there will be any dredging to get out to the river, because trying to get your boat out to the river today is a challenging thing, and you have to hug the shoreline where the swimmers are, and it's a little bit hazardous to do that. We also have swimmers in the creek. My next door neighbor in particular, her children and her dog go into the creek frequently during the summer. And I personally have a concern for their own safety with the boats that are in fact speeding up and down the creek, oblivious to any children that might be around there, I'm sure. But I think that concludes my thoughts and comments, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments regarding specifically the wetlands impact of this project? Please go forward, sir.
This is Bob Lukens. Just a point of information. The Google Earth application has a very good perspective on this local area here, showing the old or the current standing structures as well as the mud flats across from it, and using the tools there, it's fairly easy to confirm that there's about 100-foot channel width there, plus or minus 10, something like that, using those tools. But the perspective given by this application is very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Please continue, sir.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, one of my concerns was part of the staff's recommendation to you was that there was an anticipated public and private benefit that outweighed the detriment. And I'm a little confused where the public and private benefits come from, other than for Mr. Waltrip.
If I can clarify, that language comes from the ordinance itself, so you can weigh the public and or private benefits. That's a general requirement for all applicants.
What would the public benefits be?
In this case, there don't appear to be any. But well, that's for the board, that's for the Wetlands Board to decide, but obviously they can weigh the benefits to the public or to the private.
And I guess another concern I had was putting in a revetment of that size, even though it's above the need of the water line. I don't know if it's really necessary. There's no fetch there. It's a very narrow part of the creek. There's no erosion. So I'm just not sure why all that rock is needed.
Thank you. Thank you. And to clarify her statement, it was the public and or private interests. All right. Are there any other new comments? All right. I will close this public hearing and open it up for board questions. I think in this case, I mean, there's a lot of public comments. There's a lot of considerations, but the questions are pretty clear where jurisdiction lies, outline why they're doing the work they're doing, and they've minimized the impact down to 20 square feet, which falls much greater.
Excuse me, Mr. Dunn. Would you talk into the microphone, please?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Apologize. Any other?
Mr. Chairman, repeat or echo your comments, sentiments. We heard some very good and compelling testimony today. The venue for that testimony, however, may be in front of VMRC at a public hearing, and concur that our scope is very limited, and so some of the detriments that the public is feeling, perhaps not as, even though I know it's the entire project, our piece of that is, as you said, very small.
Could I request Mr. Long just put up that the slide that shows what we're the small part of this whole project that we're considering tonight, and just review that one last time. Just show that our jurisdiction we only have jurisdiction over those two little yellow slivers, right?
Yes, sir. So on
the rest of this project, it's out of our hands.
Yes,
is
sir.
that correct? That's correct?
That is correct, yes. The portions highlighted in yellow above are the only two portions that have any jurisdiction in this, under this board tonight. Everything in green is outside the board's jurisdiction.
So we're only looking at those, that one retaining wall and the open pile wharf, and the wetland impact was we're only considering how many square feet of wetlands impacts?
20 square feet. 20
square feet of wetlands impacts. Not all these other issues that are very valid issues that are raised about this project, but we have to focus on that. That's all we can legally consider.
That is correct.
Okay.
Other discussions?
I mean, no, if I put my blinders on and I focus on these two yellow wharfs and retaining walls, like I said earlier, it looks to be a good engineering solution to maintain that boat access. Albeit there's a lot of other things going on here, but if I stay focused on that, I can't see any issue with that.
I can motion.
Make a motion to approve WJPA 20-0023. The MRC portion of that is not up for our consideration, right? We're just on the wetland board part of that. I propose that we approve that.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you all for your thoughtful presentations.
Mr. Dunn, may we take a 5-minute recess, please?
Yes. Do I need to tap the gavel for that or just let it roll?
You can just call a recess.
All right. 5-minute recess.
Maybe an hour 45. I think it might. Chesapeake is an hour and a half. I think it might win. You always like to have a little friendly. Past few meetings have been exciting. Yeah, I feel for these audits. You know, they have valid concerns. It's just not. It's not us. It's others. And Vera Mercy can stand that. So even if it was commercial, turn this on and go back to it. So let's say it was commercial. What would we do? Yeah, I think they spoke to the fact that if it was commercial, I think they have to. You have to do special. Well, yeah, that's critical wetlands. Oh, I don't know. What is? I mean, I read the word and I was like, I don't even know what the wetlands board is. Like, I don't even know if it matters. I think it's more in the planning side of it. Absolutely. That is. Absolutely. Go to the board of supervisors. I mean, I think the impacts are the impacts, whether it's a commercial impact or a private impact. I think it's more the planning. Yeah. It's just a change in use, not a change. Yeah. I think it has more hoops to go through from the building A side. Have to go to the board of supervisors. But not the building E side. Right. That's what I was wondering. Yeah, we're just looking at impacts.
There actually is a definition of commercial pier in the DMRC.
I saw that. It's for sale,
guidelines.
lease, or rent.
Yeah.
So that.
I chose not to bring it up. That's not in our jurisdiction.
Yeah, I did too. I thought about mentioning that. I was like, I'm not a VMRC expert. I don't want to. But yeah, you're right. Well, it'll still go on to VMRC then. So I mean.
Well, VMRC is going to have to make a decision about whether that's a commercial structure.
Right. And that letter may not satisfy their concerns because that's just a county internal.
But the county, if he was selling slips, would have to consider that a commercial property.
Yeah, he'd have to get an SUP. He'd have to, go through planning and go to the board of supervisors. It'd be a pretty long process.
Well, which doesn't change the fact that it gets built.
All right. We don't need to.
Don't need a motion to call the meeting back.
All right, call the meeting back to order. Public hearing.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present WJPA 20-0032. Mr. Daniel Winnall, Water's Edge Construction, has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. Mark and Ms. Maria Valeka to remove and replace a pier and construct a floating dock, a finger pier, an open-sided boathouse, and a covered deck on property located at 6413 Conservancy within the College Creek watershed. There is an existing pier and floating dock on the property that is beginning to fail. It is for this reason the applicants are proposing to remove the existing pier and reconstruct a 375 linear foot pier adjacent to the existing pier. The proposed pier will traverse approximately 225 linear feet of vegetated wetlands and will also include the construction of a floating dock and finger pier, and also an open-sided boathouse. The existing pier demolition and new pier construction will be performed via barge at high tide. This construction method may impact the vegetated wetlands along the barge pathway for installation of the new pier plus the removal of the existing pier. On April 7th, 2009, a special committee session of the Wetlands Board was assembled to address staff concerns of wetland impacts on very specific open pile structures. Staff concerns were based on observations from several projects they had seen in the past. The Wetland Board considered this matter at the regular meeting on May 13th, 2009, and adopted the recommendation from the special committee, which is that a wetlands permit be required for the construction of open pile structures proposed in vegetated tidal wetlands of the county. In those cases where staff has a valid reason to anticipate that the construction of such structures may result in the alteration of natural wetland contours or the unreasonable obstruction of tidal flow. The issue before the board is not the pier and the appurtenant structures, as it is a non-commercial open pile structure exempt from needing a wetlands permit, but the manner of constructing the pier and any wetland impacts that may occur from construction. The pier will extend approximately 280 feet through the vegetated tidal wetlands. The removal of the existing pier will occur through approximately 350 feet of the vegetated tidal wetlands. Due to the unknown quantity of wetland impacts that may occur due to the construction method, staff suggests a surety in the amount of $46,000 be required to guarantee the no net loss wetland policy as outlined in 4 VAC 20-390-10. The surety shall be set aside for 1 year after the construction, and that the wetland impact issue be revisited by staff and other interested parties to determine the extent of any permanent vegetated wetland impacts. At that point in time, mitigation could be required or the surety returned to the property owner if there are no permanent impacts outside of the proposed construction impacts. Prior to or concurrent with starting construction, the contractor shall photo document the pathway of the construction barge at low tide. Also, staff shall obtain drone coverage of the work area at low tide if feasible. The summer after construction, photo documentation and drone coverage shall again occur at low tide along the new pier alignment if feasible. If impacts have occurred, the impacted area shall be planted or credits purchased at an approved tidal wetland mitigation bank at the owner's discretion. Furthermore, the alignment of the old pier shall not be counted towards project impacts. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, has committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature. And the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside the wetlands. Should it satisfy all three criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as follows: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment in lieu of fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of the permit. Staff has reviewed this application and finds that this project meets the three criteria outlined above. It is anticipated that approximately 2,300 square feet of vegetated wetlands may be impacted during the construction of this project. The owner shall replant the impacted area or may purchase credits from an approved tidal wetland mitigation bank. Staff has reviewed the above application and recommends approval of this application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits as required for this project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approval permits prior to the commencement of such activities. A surety of $46,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. Before and during construction, the contractor shall photo document the pathway of the construction barge at low tide, and staff shall provide a drone coverage of the work area, if possible, to determine the extent of existing vegetation. The summer after construction is completed, staff shall photo document and provide for drone coverage of the work area for comparison to pre-construction site conditions. A meeting shall take place with staff and the contractor no later than 1 year after pier construction is completed to determine the extent of wetland impacts, if any. The owner may, at their discretion, replant the affected areas or purchase wetland credits from an approved tidal wetland mitigation bank. Once proof of the plantings or wetland credit purchase has been provided, the surety shall be returned. If there are no permanent wetland impacts, the surety will also be returned. The wetlands permit for this project shall expire on September 9th, 2023, if construction has not begun, and an extension of the permit be submitted in writing to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 29th, 2023, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. I'll now present a brief presentation. Slide indicates, again, the applicant's request is to remove and construct a pier, floating dock, finger pier, open-sided boathouse, and covered deck. Next slide shows a vicinity map of the property, outlined here in blue, again on the College Creek watershed. Next slide shows an aerial photograph with the current pier construction visible. The next slide shows the topography of the upland area, and the slide after shows the floodplain. Next slide shows the site plan as it has been submitted. In the area in red being the existing pier has a traverse wetlands, and the area in yellow being the new pier construction path. Next slide shows a cross section of the dock, the deck, and fingers. Site photograph number 1 is taken from the existing pier. See the vegetated wetlands in the area. Next photo, looking again from the existing pier down it. Site photo 3. Site photo 4, looking off in the direction of the proposed pier. Again, site photo 5, highlighting the area for the pier to have traversed. Again, staff does recommend approval of this application as presented, given that all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits are required, that all development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations. A surety of $46,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work. That before and during construction, the contractor shall photo document the pathway of the construction barge at low tide and staff shall provide drone coverage of the work area to determine the extent of existing vegetation. That the summer after construction is complete, staff shall photo document and provide for drone coverage of the work area for comparison to pre-construction site conditions. That a meeting shall take place with staff and the contractor no later than 1 year after pier construction is completed to determine the extent of wetland impacts. At the time, the owner may, at their discretion, replant the affected areas or purchase wetland credits from an approved tidal wetlands mitigation bank. Once proof of the wetland plantings or wetland credit purchase has been provided, the surety shall be returned. If, in the case that there are no wetland impacts, the surety will also be returned. And this wetlands permit shall expire on September 9th, 2023 if construction has not begun. And if an extension for this permit is needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 29th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Mr. Long, Bob Lukens here. Let's see, there was a statement in there, I can't find it in the document at the moment, regarding how the area of the alignment of the old structure would not be considered as part of the impact area. Is that correct?
That's correct. The area that that's being removed will not be. However, the method of removal will be considered a part of the impacts. Therefore, moving through with the barge has the potential to impact the vegetated area there. Actually removing it.
Yes.
So it's very similar in nature and semi-confusing.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Lukens, this is Mike Wilson here.
Yes.
To clarify or to expand upon Mr. Long's response, staff felt that it would be double jeopardy for the applicant to have incurred the impacts for the original pier, not only when it was constructed, but as it's being removed, to have to mitigate for that as well. So that's why we did not include that in the impact total.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Further questions? Thank you. I open the public hearing. Will the applicant or their representative, if they wish to make a statement, come forward? Get your name for the record.
I'm Danny Winall with Waters Edge Construction. I'm the agent and contractor for this project. First of all, I just want to say that I'm opposed to the Wetlands Board having an ordinance for open pile piers. I think James City County is probably the only county in the state that does that. Do you know of any other counties, Jeff, that have require a wetlands permit for an open pile pier?
This is Jeff Madden with VMRC, not to my knowledge.
But having said that, I mean, I had some concerns with staff's original presentation, but I met with Mike, me and Mike discussed it, and we worked things out. And my concerns are, if you looked at the pictures, I think picture 3 and picture 5 show a lot of areas in that marsh with no existing vegetation. I mean, College Creek watershed is a stressed watershed. There's neighborhoods, it's being surrounded by neighborhoods that are like 50 years old that didn't have any stormwater plan whatsoever. So it's, that marsh is kind of stressed. And we've run into this in the past, building piers out there, where we were accused of destroying wetlands where there were no wetlands before. So you can probably understand my position. But if county staff will provide a drone coverage of the marsh before the vegetation dies this fall to see exactly what is there, and then we do it again after we get done, I'm happy with what they recommended. And another thing is, if there is impacts, we are allowed to replant them ourselves instead of putting them into a wetlands mitigation bank. I mean, you've got this is one of the rare projects where you can actually replant on site. Most projects we do, you cannot replant on site. So this project you can. But our means and methods are really the best means and methods to build a pier out here. Yes, you can see at high tide, there's a lot of water in that marsh. We plan on moving our equipment in and out at high tide. We're going to come in once, drive the piles, build a pier, then we'll move over and we'll demo the old pier as we go out. Our new pier will be at +6, which is a whole lot higher than the old pier. So there'll be adequate sunlight underneath the pier. So I would feel that the marsh will be fine under the pier. The old pier is like +3. So what's under that old pier is probably dormant. There's probably nothing there, but it will probably fill back in once we remove that pier. Any questions for me?
Yeah, one quick one on the new pier. You're putting it off to the side from the existing pier.
If you look at the footprint of there you go. The footprint of the old pier, it goes out to the right and goes out. The new pier is going to be like 75 feet shorter than the old pier. So the actual impacts, once the old pier is gone and the new pier is installed, will be less than what's there now. Okay. And with the elevation increase of the new pier, there'll be opportunity for the wetlands to grow underneath the pier. The overall impacts will be less than what's there now.
Any other questions?
Mr. Winnell, I note your objection to the policy, but are you in agreement with the resolution as presented by staff?
I am reluctantly in agreement with the resolution that is presented by the county staff. But we work with them all the time. We get along with the county very well. So we're comfortable in this situation that we all can get on the same page and have a satisfactory resolution at the end of the project. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? No, then I will close the public hearing and open it to board discussions.
I remember when we approved like the first one of these projects, quite a few years back on College Creek, and I was a little bit skeptical about, man, this isn't going to have any impacts on the marsh. And then the staff did a really good presentation and came back to us and showed us what the marsh looked like after one growing season, and there was no way you could tell. The marshes are really pretty resilient, and if it's done properly and, nothing, the backloader doesn't fall off into the marsh or anything like that, the impacts are really pretty negligible. I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell that, that all this work had been done in the marsh. Just went like 1 year, one growing season later.
Mr. Gussman, are you suggesting we revisit our policy?
What?
Are you suggesting that we revisit our policy?
No. I'm going to expand on that a little bit later. Yep.
All right, there's no other board discussions.
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board Case WJPA 20-0023.
Mr. Rodley?
Dyslexic.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
All right, the motion carries.
Okay, there are no board considerations. There are no matters of special privilege. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, we are adjourned.
All right. Moving along, I'd like to call to order the September 9th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Would someone like to make a motion to allow Mr. Lukens to participate remotely.
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Our next order of business is roll call.
Mr. Roadley,
Here.
Mr. O'Brien,
Here.
Mr. Guessman,
Here.
Mr. Dunn,
Here.
and Mr. Lukens.
Yes, here from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Lukens.
Next order of business are the minutes from our August 12th meeting. Do the minutes look okay to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, the minutes stand approved. Our next order of business of public hearings, and we have one case, CBPA 20-0080.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. Here to present case CBPA 20-0080, 2844 Castling Crossing, Mr. Allen and Ms. Julie Moore. Mr. Brian Duval of Elite Comfort Mechanical has applied for Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Allen and Mrs. Julie Moore for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a sunroom on property located at 2844 Castling Crossing within the Mill Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 48123-00018. Parcel was platted in 1998 prior to the 2004 changes to the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance. Total lot size for this property is 0.14 acres, of which 100% is within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to convert an existing deck on the property into a sunroom. The existing deck is the result of a deck expansion constructed in 2016. The applicant at that time did obtain a building permit, but there was no corresponding Chesapeake Bay exception granted for the deck. Mitigation requirements for the original request would have equated to the planting of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. But because there was no Chesapeake Bay approval for the deck, mitigation requirements for the proposed renovation to a sunroom will equate to 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. Staff's evaluated this application and the exception request for the proposed renovation of the existing deck into a sunroom. The applicant meets the ordinance conditions found in sections 23-11 and 2314 and should be heard before this board because the addition is proposed within the seaward 50-foot RPA buffer and because the original construction was not approved by this board. The board may grant exceptions to 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting this exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not a substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed, which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented above. Should the board also find that this exception request meets all 5 of those conditions, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. The applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. Mitigation plan equating to 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. That a surety of $1,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. That this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by September 9, 2021, and written requests for extensions are submitted to our office no later than July 29, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. For you is the presentation on the next slide. Applicant request is to construct a sunroom. And next slide, the vicinity map showing the subject parcel within the Lake Powell Forest subdivision in the Mill Creek's watershed. Aerial photograph from 2015 showing the original deck that was built with the house. Also, it shows a retaining wall that had been built with the construction of the house. All of that was approved. From 2019, the extent of the deck that was built in 2016 that did get a building permit but did not get a Chesapeake Bay exception. Topography as it existed on the site prior to house construction, it was a very steeply sloped lot. Conservation easement surrounding this property and RPA affecting this property. You can see from this photo, the RPA encompasses 100% of the property. From the site plan application, or from the application, the extent of the existing deck will be converted into sunroom, 100-foot RPA, and the proposed construction. And from the project site, version of the deck into a sunroom had begun. Staff was made aware of this. We stopped construction of the sunroom and asked the applicant to please get a Chesapeake Bay exception for the work. As part of the requirement, part of the mitigation in the report, you would have, if you listen carefully, the original mitigation would have been 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. Staff did double that because of work starting prior to the exception request being granted. Staff does recommend approval, and with these conditions, should the board so choose, any other necessary local, federal, and state permits, mitigation plan equating to 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs be submitted to our division. A surety of $1,000 be paid, guaranteed of mitigation, that the exception request be null and void should construction not begin before September 9, 2021, and written request for an extension be submitted to our office no later than July 29, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this application.
Questions for staff?
So he was not cited for being in violation because he is now submitted for this proposed structure?
That is correct.
And that mitigation of 2 canopy, 4 and 6 is in the area where the deck was?
It will be yes. Most likely, Mr. O'Brien, that mitigation would be planted over in this area. We don't know specifically. It won't be around the deck specifically unless there's shrubs. And certainly that won't be under the structure. There's potential to have some plantings below the retaining wall. That's not preferable due to maintenance issues of the retaining wall. But Mr. Moore has not yet provided a mitigation plan. He may do so tonight, but staff hasn't seen that yet.
How is this considered not self-created?
The fact that Mr. Moore did obtain a building permit in 2016 for the construction of the deck itself leads staff to believe it was just an oversight within the county processes at that point in time, that no Chesapeake Bay exception was required.
In this current construction, you had a construction permit?
The contract is my understanding, and Mr. Moore may correct me if I'm wrong, but the contractor was under the assumption that a Chesapeake Bay exception had already been obtained for the deck and therefore didn't need one to convert it from a deck to a sunroom. Which, if an exception had been granted in 2016, that would be a true statement.
That would be a true statement?
It would be.
Saying that an exception from 2016, if we granted it today, or did back in 2016, that if he could convert it in 2020, 3 years later?
The footprint of the impacts had already been realized. So to convert from one impervious surface to a different impervious surface to staff doesn't matter. Okay. If it was a patio and they wanted to and put a house addition on top of it, not increase the footprint, we treat that the same way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to address the board?
Board, Alan Moore, homeowner, 2844 Castling Crossing, retired police detective, James City County, 28 years of service. Lived in James City County 35 years, been in this current home for 5 years. In 2016, when we permitted the deck, I was unaware, the builder, bottom line is, I don't know if a exception was done or not. I left that up to the builder. It passed inspection. The final inspection was done in 2016, and all was well. Okay. So what we decided to do on this, my wife and I decided to build a sunroom on the existing deck, not breaking any other ground, any ground disturbance. It just going on top of the deck. The architect drew it up, stamped, submitted it. The builder, the current builder, was under the impression that the building permit would be fast-paced within 3 days. He had $20,000 worth of materials, so in 2.5 days, he did that work. It's not even close to being for the frame inspection, but he did that work, then was notified by Mr. Long that Chesapeake Bay would be involved, and that's when the progress stopped, and that's why we're here today.
Any questions for the applicant?
No.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board? Okay.
I just want to comment that once again, we're seeing contractors continuing to perform construction without getting the permits done.
Mr. Chairman, I will ask Mr. Moore, I noticed in the photograph that the area under the deck is, the rain drips through and looks like it's doing some mild form of erosion there. You might just consider mulching or graveling that area under the deck to help.
Sir, I have some gravel already, but what is transpired is because all the work is stopped, there are no gutters now. So on the new roof line of the new deck, the water has to come off, the gutters will be installed all the way around.
Thank you.
Any other discussion from the board? Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for the Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0053 at 146 Red Oak Landing.
Carmen, can we have the roll call?
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, motion carries and your exception is granted. Thank you for coming out this evening. That concludes our public hearings. I see one item for board consideration. Mr. Wilson, can you quickly present that?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Here to present exception number CBPA 19-0121 at 4053 South Riverside Drive. Mr. Bob Kaufman is requesting a 1-year extension to the CBPA 19-0121, originally granted November 13, 2019. He's been unable to secure the necessary permits required for his project, and staff concurs with his request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except for the expiration date be reauthorized, and that the new date of expiration be November 13, 2021.
Any questions for the staff? Any comments from the board?
Nope.
Okay. Do we need a motion?
Yes, please.
Can someone make a motion on this?
Make a motion to request CBPA 19 Tech 0121.
We have a roll call, please.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Okay, that concludes.
Yes.
Before we go on, I don't believe there's any matters of special privilege. I'm always a little bit confused between board considerations and special privilege. I've got two items to very quickly mention. That case that we heard in the wetlands portion of the board, the public hearing for VMRC 20-1053 at the airport, 20 Markley Road. The revetment there is going to be, is in the uplands, and I understand that that can be acted upon administratively. It doesn't necessarily, it would not necessarily come before the board, but because of all the public comment, if the board concurs, I'd request the staff not tackle that administratively and to bring it before the full board, so so that it can be discussed. We can and the citizens can see that we're considering it seriously. I don't know, what are the thoughts of the other board members? It could be acted upon by just Mike signing off on it. Would you like to see the whole project come, see all that, it's a significant amount of revetment.
To be crossing territory.
Mike, would you answer that, please?
Mr. Dunn, the revetments are outside of VMRC's jurisdiction. They are 100% in the upland.
But they're in the RPA. So
they're in the RPA, correct.
So it comes under the purview of the Chesapeake Bay Board. But he can act on it by himself without all of us considering it, but I'd like all of us to look at it.
I'll cede to your discretion.
What?
I said I'll cede to your discretion.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but I think you were prefacing it with the comment that there was a lot of public discussion and concern about that. I didn't get a sense that that was their concern. The concern was more the boathouse and the. But I mean,
one of the speakers did comment on it.
About the revetment?
That's what made me
He asked
think
why
that.
they need so much time for revetment, while it was going.
Okay, so if that's okay with the staff, just bring it to.
I will be in contact with Mr. Waltrip to have him submit for the board.
The other thing, despite Mr. Winall's remarks that maybe we don't need to be looking at piers, I think we should continue to look at impacts to piers. And sometime tonight we had a couple of issues that were raised before us that hadn't come up before, or the idea of boathouses. It's not in the law. It's not something we consider. But I was wondering if maybe eventually, maybe when we'll have a work session, and I'd like us to, at the work session, maybe to put that on the agenda to discuss boathouses. It's not under our purview now, but just have a discussion of boathouses and piers and these big platforms out in the river. I'd like to just talk about it, and maybe we might want to make a request.
So you're suggesting the county put a moratorium on boathouses in the county?
Excuse me?
Are you suggesting that the county put a moratorium
on
boathouses?
No, not a moratorium, but maybe there should be some guide, but maybe there should be more county review of boat, maybe the county wants to review boat houses and we don't want to defer them to the VMRC.
I don't know that that legislation allows for us to do that.
Well, then I'd like Ms. Parman, you know, at the work session, she can tell us that, forget it. You know, we don't have any authority to do that. But maybe the county could. Maybe it wouldn't fall under the purview of the board, and it would be but we could pass on our comments to the Board of Supervisors. So if we do, eventually we'll have a work session, and I just want to put it as an agenda item, and then also the whole business of commercial residential. Maybe what's a commercial versus a residential project? Maybe we want to be a little bit more specific in our county code about that. You know, it was pretty clear tonight. If the applicant says it's residential, then it's residential. But you know, I was thinking about, this made me think about dog kennels in the county. If you've got 5 dogs, you got to have a dog. You got to have a kennel license, regardless if they're your own dogs or your boarding dogs or not. You know, the county rules of kennels, I think, maybe it's 6 dogs, I don't know, but I think it's pretty clear on that. Maybe
Liz is looking that up right now.
What?
It's probably in the zoning ordinance, which I don't have in front of me. I can certainly look at it.
Maybe we want to consider an amendment to our ordinance that says, okay, up to 3 boat piers or 5 boat piers or 9 boat piers, it's okay, but beyond a certain number, there's a higher level of scrutiny. This is just all I'm saying is, let's talk about it at a work session. And if we don't think we need it, or we're told it's illegal, we can't do it, then forget it. But let's keep a little list of things, you know, for eventually when things get more normal and we do have a work session, we can talk about. Any objections to that? You know, and maybe on reflection, we don't need any changes to the existing rules, but let's bat it around at a work session. Anybody have any other things for board consideration or matters of special privilege?
Nope.
We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.